I think everyone as a kid has that one game or series they really want to get into, but just couldn't. There's just something about it that just pulls you in, but as much as you try, you just couldn't get into it. For me, this was the Megaman Battle Network series. I always loved the aesthetics of Mega Man in general, despite being awful at platformers as a kid, but Battle Network was even more appealing to me. Stylistically, it was like Digimon, one of my other childhood favorites. It was closer to the RPGs I was playing too, and I was a kid when the anime ran its course, so I was very much the target demographic. But try as I may, I couldn't get into the series. I can't specifically remember why, but I remember parts of it being the dungeon designs were confusing and the game kinda just threw me in before I could really grasp the mechanics. The lack of conventional level ups also meant the encounters I got into didn't feel as good as all the other RPGs I was playing at the time as well. But despite these problems, I always did want to come back to the series and play through them. I spent time as an adult tackling older games I could never get through as a kid, and with all the Mega Man collections that have come out over the past few years, I knew Battle Network's time was coming. And earlier this year, the Mega Man Battle Network collection came out featuring all 6 games. And can I just take a moment to say that I really like collections like this? So many companies struggle with legacy support and Capcom just bundles these games together and throws them out there. Not even just that though, Battle Network, like Pokemon, eventually started doing multiple versions per entry. So I'm sure someone at Capcom had a worry of, do we make an ideal version with both games' contents, or... And then someone else went, nah bro, just throw them all in there and let people decide which one to play. And I love that energy. Bringing up Pokemon again, I wish this was something they could just do with that series. But that's another video. After all these years, let's finally get to Mega Man Battle Network 1. Mega Man Battle Network 1 was conceived from a couple different desires. First off, the desire to get a game on the new handheld to release at the time, the Game Boy Advance. And Capcom wanted to capitalize on both the rise of card games and the popularity of Pokemon at the time. A novel idea, but not one that could be made easily. The devs also wanted to make a game focused towards the younger demographics at the time that had grown up with technology, so they aimed at making something, while futuristic, more modern than the other Mega Man series, with Battle Network taking place in a more contemporary setting with just enhanced technology. And you know what? These desires really did pay off. Mega Man Battle Network's setting and their premise of everyone having a personal terminal that handles all their mail and such aged beautifully. Cell phones existed in the early 2000s and late 90s, but Battle Network may be the closest series from that point that really predicted where it and a lot of other technology would go. Likely by accident, but it's still cool to see. And because of that, the game's setting feels, well, closer to now actually, making the collections feel very well timed, and in terms of its style, instead of being a platformer like the other Mega Man series, it would be a combination of tactical RPG and card battling. I'll get into the specifics in a bit, but this gameplay system would be ahead of its time, with many games coming out later, influenced by Battle Network or not, resembling the games. I think one of the reasons I was able to get into it so much easier this time as well, I'm an adult now, but also my experience with other games like it, transferred really well into getting back into this series. Battle Network follows Lan Hikari, a young boy living in AC/DC town with his Navi Mega Man. These are personal companions that live in your pet, or cell phone. They're cell phones. No dry joke or irony, they're just cell phones. Lan is your typical everyday kid. Loves to go out, plays with his friends, is late to school, and weekly stops cyber-terrorism plots that would otherwise result in the death and destruction of multiple people. He also has Heelys. Viruses and cyber-terrorism is on the rise in the world of Mega Man Battle Network due to the expansion and development of AI and the internet, and people can use their Navis to not only net battle your friends like a trading card game, but also bust viruses and keep the network safe. Even in school, you're taught the basics of net battling, which is kinda funny. Imagine if in the real world 5th grade, you had to learn how to casually fight cyber-terrorism. This game is a series of episodic events where every dungeon is a new day or problem that Lan and Mega Man have to solve. It feels very much like an episodic anime, and I found this presentation absorbing. It's all very stylized and colorful, and the game in general just looks fantastic. Not with the new filter, take that off, but once you do, the game's sprite work has aged wonderfully. Even from just this first game and from the presentation, it's pretty clear the game was developed alongside its cartoon to kinda match the feel of both the show and the game. It just has this very comfy anime vibes that make it nice to just exist in. All of the sections in the game are unified by being caused by members of the terrorist organization World 3, or WWW, where Dr. Wily's aiming to cause destruction around the world and eventually destroy it altogether. And if you're wondering, yes, that Dr. Wily from the original Mega Man series. Mega Man Battle Network is a sort of alternate reality / alternate take on the original series, where Dr. Hikari, instead of advancing robotics, advanced the internet and AI, which, if you've never seen the lore for how the original timeline turned out, probably saved billions of lives. Good going there, Doctor. And honestly, if you've played the original series, as you go along, you start to realize this is the formula just being transformed into a new genre. You aren't platforming through 8 optional stages, but you are going through themed dungeons and finish by fighting a villain akin to the original Robot Masters. I honestly find this pretty fascinating as a concept to take the format from one genre and try to make it work in another, but also the story of this game is just as simple as it is surreal. It feels like one of those Adult Swim shows with a childlike art style that is then about mature themes. I mean, this game looks and sounds like a cartoon in the best ways possible, but then the plot lines are, Megaman, Fireman is causing problems in people's ovens, and it's causing them to burn down their houses and murder them. Okay, Megaman, we beat him, let's just go to bed. Megaman, they messed up the traffic systems and we have witnessed several fatalities. Okay, Megaman, we won, let's go back home. It's weird. I've played a bit of Battle Network 2 already, and while similar, the day-to-day problems and dangers feel much more grounded to the setting and the feel of the sub-series. It was likely clear from feedback that while interesting to take the classic formula and present it in a new way, the storytelling was way too weak, and likely tone-deaf as well to the new RPG series, and they likely sought to improve upon that in the game's sequels. On the bright side, I still really enjoyed the amount of story gameplay integration. You can jack in a lot of places with Mega Man, from the aforementioned dungeons to common everyday objects, and I know it's weird, but it's simple stuff like this that lets you get more acclimated to a game's world and setting. Once you're in cyberspace, the control switches from land to Mega Man. Like the original series, Mega Man has his trusty Mega Buster, but instead of platforming, you instead run through dungeons and get into random battles. Battles take place on a set of grids where you maneuver to dodge and attack enemies. And every 10 seconds, you're drawing 5 chips like you're drawing trading cards. And you can load up Mega Man with these chips for different attacks. You've got close range powerful sword slashes, long range cannons, there's a lot of cool attacks that excel in different scenarios. The fundamentals of the game, while unique, are easy to grasp, at least the game made it easy. Later games just kinda rush by it, but this game is a somewhat slow introduction. And to me who had troubles as a child, I did appreciate it so I could fully understand it. And the game will progressively amp up the heat as well. Hitting enemies and dodging them becomes much more dynamic as time goes on, and they become much stronger as well. The first bump you'll need to get over is replacing chips in your deck with new chips you either buy or get from enemies. Unlike Classic, you don't beat a boss and get a new form, at least not until the later games from what I know. Instead, defeating enemies can yield chips based off their attacks, not only making each encounter a potential new move you can get, but it's a unique way of transitioning Mega Man's trademark versatility into a new genre. I was reluctant at first to not mess up my deck, but a lot of these are great, ranging from huge blasts to just throwing down a statue and killing everything. It's a decent way to give a game without experience a form of progression. However, like the Cybersloop duology, I'm not a fan of missable upgrades. In this game you have HP boosts that, well, what do you think? And power-ups that either increase your buster damage, increase its rate of fire, or improve its charge. These feel legitimately impactful, but there are a handful of missable ones. You'll likely find enough in your journey, and if push comes to shove there are plenty of viable ones too, but I'm never a fan of missable progression systems, especially in a game that can get quite challenging at points, because it can punish the player for not going down a random hall in these especially long dungeons. Battle Network's base gameplay is great, and for the most part you'll likely not run from battles because they are fun and beneficial, which is great because there is no run button, and you have to luck into a run draw. No, the problem with this game is its dungeons. When I started, I was enchanted. I played this game for hours and was confused why so many hardcore Battle Network fans said this was a bad one. The opening does a great job establishing the cast, setting, and unique quirks of the series, and hey, you quickly make progress and defeat a major boss and dungeon. And then I did more dungeons and went, oh no, I see, I get it. How do I put this? You ever play a game where you do a dungeon and you go, okay, the dungeon gimmick and theme was cute, but it has lived out its novelty. We've been here a while, we've had some fun, had some drinks, let's move on. And then you get to the next room and you go, oh, there's like 20 more minutes here. That is most of the dungeons in this game. They are overly long and just obnoxious to go through. People told me that the power plant was bad, and it is. Its gimmick requires dumb luck and matching through text boxes featuring invisible floors. But the one that got me was the water plant, where you need to go through, do annoying ice puzzles, leave, then come back and do it again. Just impeccable dungeon design. You know a dungeon is bad where I'd rather save before something and reset to get back to doing it faster, so I'm not punished with walking back and losing time in encounters. But the funny thing is, for all the bad dungeons, its final dungeon is unironically really good. Final dungeons are an art. And most games struggle with them because you need to make it a test of everything the game has done, but if you make them too long or aggravating, you're at risk of threatening your story at the time people want to see what happens next the most. And maybe it's just the contrast, but it's well paced out and respects your time. It uses old puzzles well and has all your friends to come in and help you, and I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. You can even easily leave if you need to and come back and not lose out on much progress. The idea of making the endgame boss rush a dungeon rush instead with reusing ideas from old dungeons is also a nice way of remixing classic Mega Man. It is a weirdly great final dungeon. This is, of course, ruined by having an incredibly awful pre-final boss. Bosses in this game are generally fun, inconsistent in challenge, but they usually offer different flavors of testing the combat. Proto Man is a highlight for me because it punishes you for being overly aggressive unlike other bosses, since he can block anything and new players like me will easily die, but once you get the timing down it becomes a much easier, very satisfying boss. But Magic Man is awful. Huge damage, summons random enemies whose potential attack pattern combinations can be a nightmare, and you can't save between him and the true final boss, meaning if you die, you have to do it all again. For all of its dungeon problems, you can save anywhere and heal to full at the end of every fight, which makes everything up to this point at least bearable. But to take saving away at the last minute is just obnoxious. Side note, pick up armor. This game mentions armor in a throwaway line to where a lot of players can miss it without exploring, and you need it because it halves damage and the game will start expecting you to have it. But this fight, it doesn't matter. Make even a few mistakes, and you're cooked. And I was at 3 in the morning, I remembered everyone who told me the first game sucked, and I was still editing the Dragon Quest video and I just went, fuck it. Kill this man. The collections features Buster Max, an effective win button. I never used it before and I never want to need it for future games. I have nothing against these kinds of things personally, but for my first run of games I like to beat them proper to see if I can do it. But this was a case of, I'm not wasting my time here, and it's especially awkward because the final boss is an easier version of this fight. A medium boss with strong telegraph attacks that summons enemies that test your skills but isn't too overwhelming. And it had to be this way because someone decided you couldn't save. It's odd, it's weird, it's very first gamey, and that's how I feel about Battle Network in general. It's a first run. They had some great ideas and a great foundation but weren't sure how to entirely execute it. Something I can understand because it is such a new idea. And considering it went on to get 5 sequels, they clearly wanted to improve upon it. But as for this game, I can't really recommend it. I'm still glad I played it first. I like the vanilla feel of no special power-ups and just sticking to the basics, but I'm sure if I tried to play this even after just the next game, the lack of improvements would have made the experience even worse. And in general, I'm glad I am finally coming back and playing this series. But I won't be able to truly recommend the collection until I get to the next few games. Speaking of that, I likely won't be reviewing Mega Man Battle Network 2, which I'm going to play on my own, and instead, my next review will be Mega Man Battle Network 3 to see how it improves upon it over the course of 3 games. Before we finish up, shout out to the YouTube commenter on one of my previous videos who recommended this series. It reminded me to finally dive into it now that the collections are out. And yeah, just to follow up on their comment, I never saw this series being close to the Cyber Sleuth series, but now that I've played it, they have very similar settings, casts, and just overall feel, and I ended up enjoying their similarities a lot, and would recommend fans of either checking the other out. And if anyone else has any other recommendations on what to play or review, I'd love to hear them. With all that said, thank you for watching, and see y'all next time.